Welcome everyone to Connected Learning TV this evening, and thanks for joining us as we kick off a month-long partnership with Scratch and Scratch Ed on Coding is for Everybody, Learning Through Creating, Personalizing, Sharing, and Reflecting. I'm Kylie Pepler. I'm an assistant professor here at Indiana University in the Learning Sciences program, and I'm also the leader of the Make to Learn initiative at the Digital Media and Learning Hub, Research Hub. Tonight, for those watching either on live stream or the recording of this webinar, today's conversation is part of our shift to a monthly format for deeper looks at connected learning themes, communities, and topics. So a few details before we dive into our topic today. To those of you on live stream right now, we encourage you to use the chat there to introduce yourselves, connect with each other, and pose questions for those here in the Google Plus Hangout. So you might want to ask a question to Mitch or to Karen as we start to progress. You also might want to introduce yourselves so that others within the Hangout know who you are and where you're coming from. And speaking of Google+, there's a fast-growing connected learning community with almost 1,600 members, and we would love for you to be part of those conversations happening there. There's a separate section on the community just for conversation about this month's focus on Coding is for Everybody, so I encourage you to look there. The link to the G+ community should be included in the live stream chat, so please look for that. The URL for our public group notes in the Google Doc for today should also be in the live stream chat. So turn to live stream for that as well. We'd really appreciate your energy in capturing the highlights and sharing resources related to today's conversation. The Google Doc will remain open to the public so we can continue adding to it even after today. And so today we're happy to be joined by both Mitch Resnick and Karen Brennan. Karen is an assistant professor at Harvard University in the Graduate School of Education and currently studies how participation in the Scratch online community supports young people as creators of computational media. And for many of you from the Scratch Ed Forum have really witnessed how she's been able to build the community within Scratch Ed over the last few years. Mitch is the Lego Papert Professor of Learning Research and the head of Lifelong Kindergarten Group at the MIT Media Lab, and one of the driving forces behind Scratch, a programming language and learning environment that helps young people learn to think creatively and reason systematically by creating and sharing all sorts of things, including interactive stories, games, and animations. And if you haven't had a chance to check out Scratch or the work coming out of Mitch's lab, I would encourage you to do a quick Google search there as well. So I wanted to take a couple minutes at the start of tonight's episode to explain why Scratch and Connected Learning TV are working together this month, and how Scratch embodies the vision of a learning approach that we call connected learning. And so first and foremost, Scratch is production-centered. It's also peer-supported. That creators within the community encourage remixing, they build on each other's work, they comment profusely, and they help each other to grow. It's also openly networked, and so it's a vibrant online community in which people can freely come and join and download projects and share with one another. Second, Scratch also embraces this idea that making as learning, or making to learn. Mitch will probably also call it coding to learn. And so it's a deep epistemological stance that has to do with this idea that we can learn all sorts of things through learning how to computer program. And then lastly, Scratch embraces this notion of equity. It's open to anyone with an internet connection, and the interface makes it easy for everyone to participate, regardless of coding knowledge or experience, and to learn the basics of coding. And so I really look forward to learning more and to sharing tonight's broadcast and the rest of the series this month with you. So Mitch and Karen, perhaps you want us to start off talking a bit more about Scratch, this monthly theme of ours, and how we're hoping people will participate this month.
Well, thank you, Kylie, and we really appreciate the opportunity to be able to spend some time over the next month. So we appreciate everyone associated with Connected Learning TV and the DML Hub for inviting us. Scratch is something that Karen and I have been working on along with others, both at the MIT Media Lab and at Harvard Graduate School of Education over the last few years, and it's great to be able to have a chance to share ideas over the next month. We'll be meeting each Monday, I guess, for the next 4 weeks, sharing some of the things that we've been learning over the future years and trying to introduce and engage other people into a conversation about ways they might participate in the community.
Yeah, we're thrilled to be here. You know, we've been so excited by and energized by the community that's built up around Scratch, because Scratch is really nothing without the passionate young learners, the passionate educators, the passionate parents, and I think all of the types of themes and ideas we see playing out in connected learning, we see that in Scratch as well. So we've been really inspired by connected learning as a framing.
Mm-hmm. And I know that we do feel this real resonance with connected learning. We sometimes talk about kindred spirits, and I think that our work within the Scratch community, we feel that a lot of people in the connected learning community are real kindred spirits, sharing a lot of the same ideas and ideals of what they're aiming for in the areas of learning and education. And actually, to some people in that community, they might, though, find the topic of coding something that they're not quite sure how they connect with. Because oftentimes, when some people think of coding, they see it as just this technical endeavor that is a very useful skill to have for some people who might go on to become professional programmers or professional computer scientists. But for some people, they see it as just for a certain specialized subcommunity that's not something for everyone. But that's why we chose as the name for this month-long series, Coding is for Everybody. I think one thing that we really believe is that it's not just a technical activity for some small subcommunity, but something that really can and should be, everyone should have the opportunity to be able to explore with coding, because we see it as something that really opens up new possibilities for people to express themselves in new ways.
And actually connecting to what you said earlier, Kylie, but it's about production, but it's also about that pure oriented learning. I think connecting is such a resonant theme for us in the ways in which we see young learners supporting each other, supporting the adults, and in the adults' learning. So it's been really inspiring for us to see, certainly in the virtual world with the Scratch online community and how that's been supporting learning, but also how it's also played out in face-to-face and how the boundaries between the online space and the face-to-face blur in interesting ways. So we're really excited to be connecting with connected learning community, and we encourage you definitely to post comments and live stream. We've got that on the side of our window, so we're keeping an eye on that the best as we can with multitasking. But also your comments and reflections in the Google Doc, and also seeing what happens in the Scratch Online community, because we're inviting you into our world if you aren't already there. I see some familiar names in the list, so it's exciting to see the connected learning and Scratch communities connected.
Yeah, but for the whole month, we really want to see this as a conversation over the month, both during these weekly meetings, but also in between. So we really hope that we can keep conversation going to sort of share ideas over the next month. Maybe one other way, the way that I sometimes think about coding and the work we do with Scratch is by analogy to writing. Mm-hmm. Because, again, of course, a few people grow up to become professional writers, professional journalists or novelists, but most people don't make their profession out of writing, and yet we see it's important for everybody to learn to write. I think we see that it's important for everyone to learn to write for a few reasons. It's partly because we can use it in our everyday lives, whether it's writing a birthday card to a friend, or keeping notes in your diary, or keeping a shopping list. There are all sorts of reasons for writing. But also writing is a way to start refining your own thinking. That as you write, you start to organize your thoughts in new ways. I think one thing that we want to think about with programming and coding this month is how it shares some of those same properties, that it's not something just for those to take it on as a professional career, but also something you could use in your everyday life and a way to help you refine your own thinking. Maybe we can take a look at, I think we started out with Scratch. Scratch first launched about 6 years ago is when we launched both the Scratch programming language and the Scratch online community. Right from the beginning, as Karen was saying, we see this strong sense of community and connectedness with Scratch. It wasn't, right from the beginning, as we put out the software, we also started the community so people could start sharing with one another. And it's really been great to see how it's grown over those last 6 years.
Should we?
Sure. Why don't we say a little bit about what's been happening over the last 6 years since Scratch got launched?
So one thing we've been really interested in, and I actually see this in the live stream, like for what ages is Scratch sort of designed. And you can see from this graph, the age at which people join the Scratch online community ranges from 8 to 18, and there's a really long tail of participation with adult hobbyists participating in the community as well, which has been really exciting.
It's been used to some universities as well. Even though we designed Scratch, actually when we first started, we said age 8 to 16. And that is where the big peak is, as you see here. Most are in that age range. But in fact, it has been used in introductory computer science courses at Harvard and a variety of other universities as well.
It's also being used with younger ages. So someone's asked about, well, can you use it with 5- and 6-year-olds? We see that all of the text can be a bit difficult for younger learners. And so with additional support from parents, that's been really exciting to see that. But do you want to talk a bit about branching out?
Yeah, so actually in the future, we're just starting now working on a special version of Scratch for younger learners, like for age 5 to 7, because we think the current version isn't so ideal for under age 8, although some people use it and do great things with it. But actually in collaboration with Marina Bears at Tufts University, we have an NSF grant to work on a version of Scratch called Scratch Junior for younger kids. So that'll be coming sometime next year.
But the diversity isn't just along age, it's also in geographic location.
So here you can see some of the places where Scratch is used, and it's really used all around the world. But one thing I know that a few years ago, we passed over that more than half of the visits to the Scratch website are from outside the United States. So although it's still more in the English-speaking world, on the other hand, it's been translated to more than 40 different languages. So if you start using Scratch, you can go to the menus and have it change to any of more than 40 languages. So it really opens it up for being used in many places around the world.
And these young learners from all around the world have been pretty busy since Scratch's launch in 2007, creating more than 3 million projects. And these are just the projects that are being shared through the online community, not including a lot of settings where there isn't web access. There's some, connected with people in museums, libraries, people at home, people in schools, where it's just the online community isn't necessarily a part of their practice of participation.
Right, so people, the way Scratch has been used until recently, people create their projects, whether it's their interactive stories or games or animations, on their own computer, and then they can share it up to the Scratch website. And every day there's thousands of new projects. It's been like 2,000 to 3,000 projects, new projects got shared every day. Just recently we launched a new version of Scratch that we sometimes call Scratch 2.0 that lets people create their projects right in the web browser. So now you can go right to the web browser and start creating your projects. This is the current version of Scratch. If you go to scratch.mit.edu, this is where you come to, and this is where you can see there's more than 3 million projects. You can try out any of them here, and you can then create your own projects and share them with other people right here. Maybe it'd be a good time to give people a sense of the types of things that are being created with Scratch. So I think we're going to start by showing it's been used for so many different purposes. Here's just like one example to give you some sense of the type of things people are creating with Scratch. So this was a project that was created by a young Scratcher, about 12 or 13 years old, and it was a birthday greeting that she created for one of her friends. Actually, do you have the volume there? Oh, okay, we want. So we have here, as you can see, it's a little animated story that a 12 or 13-year-old Scratcher made, and then pointed for one of her friends to come and see it. And again, as we said before, one of the reasons that it's important for people to learn to write is just to communicate with friends. That's a reason to learn to code with Scratch, is just to share with your friends. Here, if we want to see how it is that this animation was made, you can just click up there where it says "See Inside," and you can see the blocks. You pull out different blocks to control what it is. Actually, if I try to increase the size here, I'm not sure if you'll be able to see. I'll increase the block size a little bit. So this is the program that's controlling the flowers. So people stack blocks together, sort of like clicking Lego bricks together. As you can see, as Karen changes some of the numbers, Instead of changing the size just by a little bit, it changed the size by a lot, and it changed the nature of the animation. So people build programs. It's very different from a lot of times when people think of computer programming, they think of text with a lot of odd symbols, with square brackets and semicolons. In developing Scratch, we really wanted to try to make it as intuitive as putting Lego bricks together, and also to make it so you could just tinker with it. You could sort of try out these blocks and see, what does this do? What does that do? So the blocks just fit together. You snap them together to create the different behaviors. And then as Karen showed, you could just keep on experimenting with it, try different numbers, and it will change the behavior of what's going on. So we have each of the different characters here. We call them sprites. So down here, this is the code for the flowers that are going up and down. If I click on another one of the characters, you can see it's a different set of blocks controlling its behavior. There's the little character that's jumping in and out of the scene. So when kids create interactive birthday cards or stories or games or simulations, they just put stacks of blocks together for lots of characters, and that's the way they make their projects in Scratch. So this was a project that was made just by a girl working at home, but Scratch gets used in lots of different settings. It's not just kids working at home.
So I've been particularly interested in how Scratch can be used in more formal learning environments, but without using what I think is so special about engaging in design activities. You know, I think school is often seen as this place which is so rigid, and it's sort of devoid of connection to young learners' passions. And certainly we see Scratch being used in that way in some formal learning environments, but we also see it being used in such inspiring ways as well. And one space that I've been really interested in over the past several years is the Scratch Ed online community, which I worked on the development of as a sort of a companion space for educators to share their stories and exchange resources and all of that, because a lot of teachers look at the main Scratch website and aren't sure what to do with it, because it's a place where you create projects and you share them, and a lot of educators aren't necessarily doing that. So from there, it's led us to make all sorts of interesting connections. And actually, I want to say a shout out to one person in particular who's here, because I'm about to show a sample project that she just sent me, Kelly. So Kelly, I'm sorry to put you on the spot, but you sent me this gorgeous project that was created by one of your students. This was created by one of Kelly's students as a project for English class about Beowulf. So Beowulf assignment. Essential question, can ordinary people act heroically in order to be a hero? Do you have to be perfect or somehow chosen? So this totally blows up any notion of like the old school book report. I did not have anything like this at my disposal. And so it's a game, it's a story, you make decisions. It's just a beautiful project, so I encourage you to check it out. Hair is so important.
Yeah.
Got different shirts, I get started. We'll give our character a name. Our character Kylie. So shout out to our host. And so now we get immersed into this story. I interact with characters, I navigate, I make decisions. It's a really, really beautiful project. And still, it's in the school setting where you think that beautiful things might not happen. A lot of people sort of are, hypercritical of school settings. But with the, particular design attention to learning environments, you can do really beautiful things. So we wanted to show you at least one example, but we'll be looking at a lot of examples.
I think just even these examples start to show some of the connections with connected learning, because we see Scratch being used both in school and outside of school, and sometimes by the same young people. That sometimes young people will start with Scratch at home and then bring it into school, or learn it in school and then bring it into home. We see that, and also all the connections, both connecting to the things they're studying in school, but also connecting to their own interests. So it really cuts across boundaries in many ways. And that's how we've really tried to support through the way we've been doing things with Scratch. Mm-hmm. I think that as we've worked on Scratch, although of course Scratch is a piece of technology, it's a piece of software, but we see it as not just a type of technology. We really have tried to surround Scratch with a certain approach to learning and education. It's something we've thought about as we've built a community around Scratch. We want to encourage a certain way of thinking about learning as people are using Scratch.
Yeah, both in and out of school.
Yes, yes.
In any type of formal or informal learning environment.
Yeah. So partly, as was said in the introduction by Kylie, it's a very design-based approach. We really think about Scratch being used in a very design-based way. So we've thought a lot about how we think about this design-based learning approach, as Karen said, whether it's in school or outside of school. And we've often thought about several different aspects of what a design-based learning approach encompasses. You can say a little bit about that.
Yeah, so when we looked at what young people were experiencing, we did a lot of interviews with young people, and we talked about what do you value about your learning experiences with Scratch, but we also looked at educational theory, like what do we know about the best types of learning experiences that people have, and there were sort of 4 themes that I think were recurrent. Well, one certainly was the idea of creating, and this is something Kylie led us off with at the top of the hour, right? There's something very powerful about learning through making, producing, building, creating. Another thing that kids talked about extensively was the power of personalizing, and this is not surprising. When you care about something, it's very motivating as opposed to being, you tell me what I have to do. And so having that option to make those personal connections is really valuable. So creating, personalizing. Another big theme, particularly in the context of the online community, the power of sharing, both in terms of having an audience, so creating for people, but also having collaborators, creating with people. And then finally, maybe not always explicitly talked about, reflecting. So you're so busy collaborating, creating, personalizing, but making sure always to have that opportunity to step back and really reflect on what you've been doing, but also it gives you new ways of thinking about your own thinking. So these 4 elements, creating, personalizing, sharing, reflecting, have really guided the way that we talk about Scratch and are the organizing principles for this month.
Right, and we think about this, it's not unique to Scratch. We really think about these principles in everything we do. So in all the projects we work on, we really try to think about how it can make connections to creating, personalizing, sharing, and reflecting. It was natural as we started work on Scratch to see how we can help use those as your guiding principles for Scratch. And then over the course of the month, so with the 4 sessions, this is the first of 4 sessions, so we're going to highlight one of the themes each of the 4 sessions. So this week the theme is creating, the next week personalizing, then sharing, and then reflecting for the 4th of them at the end of the month. But actually even in today's session, which is introducing people to creating with Scratch, but we'll also organize it according to the 4 elements again. Even within creating, we're going to think a little bit about how we might think about Scratch through those 4 different lenses of creating, personalizing, sharing, and reflecting.
And actually, maybe this is just a moment for all of you, all of us, to think about learning experiences that you may have had and the ways in which they connected or not to those 4 aspects. Because as Mitch said, it's not about Scratch. Did you want to?
Yeah, so Karen had asked me ahead of time if I had a story to share from my own learning experiences. So actually, I started thinking about my own learning from childhood. And unfortunately, when I was a kid, I didn't have any personal computers. It was before they were around, so I wasn't able to work with Scratch. But I still think I was guided by some of those same dimensions that we were just talking about. One thing I loved to do, I enjoyed sports when I was growing up. But rather than just playing sports, I really wanted to create things with sports. So like my parents were tolerant enough, they let me dig up the backyard, and I sort of made my own miniature golf course. So the creating was there through that. And I tried to make my own types of wacky miniature golf holes. So it was really personalizing it. It wasn't just the things I'd seen at the local course. I was sort of making my own different types of miniature golf holes. And then I would invite kids from the neighborhood over, and they would play, and I'd get lots of ideas from that. They would say, oh, this hole could be so much better if you just did that, or why don't you try adding this type of obstacle? So the sharing played a big role in that. And then based on all the suggestions they gave me, I was always thinking about how I might do things differently. And when oftentimes things went wrong, and I would learn how to do things differently by reflecting. I would embed a Canada in the ground for the hole, and if I didn't cut out the bottom, it would fill up with rainwater. So I thought, oh, how can I do this differently? So there's always the debugging that goes on. So long before I was with computers, I was creating and personalizing and sharing, reflecting, debugging, and testing things out. And I think I think a lot of the best learning experiences have all of those elements. And we want to make sure that as kids grow up, with Scratch, they're able to have that same type of experience, but to be able to build new types of things and dynamic, interactive creations with Scratch. Mm-hmm. So with that, maybe we'll go on to
dive into
creating a little bit.
Yeah.
So I think as we thought about creating, one thing we thought would be good to talk about is that we've run a lot of workshops together over the years. I'd say in the last few years, Karen and I, we worked together on dozens, if not hundreds, of workshops. And one thing that we think about a lot is how is it that we can support learners as they start creating with Scratch? So we think creating is so important, but it's not so obvious the best way to support people as they start creating.
Well, people bring a lot of anxiety, particularly adults. We do a lot of workshop with adults, and adults I find bring a lot of anxiety. Kids too bring a lot of anxiety about programming. There's a lot of preconceptions. It's not for me. It's for super nerds. It's for someone else. It's for anyone else. So that first experience is so important. So we really push ourselves to try and find ways of making it accessible, but we don't always agree. Yeah. We don't always agree, and so we were going to share with you some of the tensions we experience. And again, not Scratch specific. Yeah. So do you want to pick a dimension? And
one that comes to mind when I think of one that we often sort of go back and forth on is sort of how much to show people ahead of time versus just letting them loose to explore. Yeah. And I'm usually more on the side of wanting people to feel comfortable. So I say I want to sort of show them a little bit more to make sure they feel comfortable before they dive in, because I'm so worried about them feeling intimidated when they dive in. Yeah. On the other hand,
I shove people right out. but my approach is, in my defense, I shove them out, but I say you'll only be out there for 10 minutes. So I use constraints in a different way. I mean, rather than sort of like building up an initial project, I just say, you go for it. The phrase I often use is, nothing bad can happen to you in 10 minutes. And I have had no fatalities yet, so I take that, I think that's been working out as a strategy.
And I do know there's the potential danger in the way that I sometimes lean is that if I show too much, sometimes it can lead people just to exactly copy what it is that I've shown. So that's a tension that we'll deal with.
But you get that good feeling of like you've built up something and you haven't just been flailing, So it is. We alternate.
Maybe another dimension that we think about is how much to start from a clean slate, just from an empty screen, and you're just starting something new, versus looking at existing projects and starting to experiment by making changes, the way that we were just changing the numbers in the birthday card. And again, I don't think there are right or wrong answers to that. I think
trade-offs.
Yeah, and also for different people. Some people might feel more comfortable one way. Other people might feel more comfortable the other way. And I've gone back and forth. Because again, I don't think there's just one way. I know with the new version of Scratch that just came out, we now have a lot of what we're calling starter projects. So we put a lot more effort into coming up with simple projects with very understandable code that are done in a way that you can start with it, but it's only they're sort of asking to be extended. So they aren't like fully completed projects, but it's beginning things. They're easy to understand. They're easy to extend it. So it's trying to open up the doors for people to start by modifying some existing projects. So I think we're experimenting a little bit more with that now, but we felt there was a need to have these special projects, because if there's 3 million projects out there, there are a lot of really inspiring projects, but a lot of them are really intimidating because you look at them, and if you're a beginner, you have no idea how it was done. And it's like picking up a book with some very advanced prose. If you've never written anything before, you say, I could never write like this.
Yeah, very intimidating. Yeah, it's hard, and particularly with workshops with kids, they get really excited by stuff that looks super sassy. Things that are glitzy, things that just dazzle, and same with adults. You just look at it, you're like, I had no idea a tool like this. Then it's something for beginners, or can do something really beautiful. But it's a trade-off. When you then peek inside, now that it's so easy to look inside, and you see all that massive code. So I think the starter projects are maybe a nice in-between point, that it's not just the most basic of basic projects, but it's also not completely impenetrable code.
Well, this idea, I think one reason that we get drawn towards some of the more inspiring SASE projects is we think it's so important to connect to the learner's interests.
Yeah.
We really want to make sure that from the beginning, they see this as something that they really care about. It's not that it's just coding for the sake of coding. They're coding because there's something they want to create. And a lot of times the most simple things, a lot of times the first project that people work on in some programming languages is just sort of, moving a little character on this stage,
world.
or the hello world, or it's very mathematical. It's like you're adding a couple numbers together, or generating, some mathematical thing that most people aren't going to be so interested in. And I think we put a high priority on how we can introduce Scratch in a way that really aligns with people's interests.
Yeah. So maybe is that a segue to
yes.
personalizing?
Yeah. So, and I do think that's one thing that we know that people have lots of different interests. There's many interests as there are people. There are so many different interests, and because we wanted people to be able to build on their interests, it was really important to us to design Scratch and the materials around Scratch so that people could use it in many different ways. They could use it connected to their own interests. Yeah, so one way we sometimes think about this is one framing that I learned from Seymour Papert, who was my mentor and one of the great pioneers in thinking about technology and learning. Seymour often talked about developing tools with a low floor and a high ceiling, meaning that it should be very easy to get started, a low floor, but you should be able to do more and more complex things over time, a high ceiling. But I think that's not quite enough. And we've sometimes recently started talking about wide walls, meaning that there should be many pathways, because even if you have a path from low floor to high ceiling, if there's only one path, that's fine for some people, but not others. So by wide walls, we mean make sure that the tools and the activities and the materials support many different pathways, so everyone from all backgrounds, of all interests, can find their own pathway into getting engaged. So if you take a look at the Scratch website and there's 3 million projects, it's great that there's 3 million projects, but even better is the diversity. If you see some examples here, it's animated stories. We see their birthday card. That was an anime comic strip. There was a virtual construction kit you actually built with virtual Lego bricks, recreations of classic video games, political opinion polls, trigonometry tutorials. We were really surprised that kids did tutorials. There are lots of tutorials on the Scratch website. Interactive artwork, and science simulations. So I think one of the things that's been, most gratifying for me is when I look at the website and see the incredible diversity. Because I think when I see the diversity, I feel that things are working well, because I think it's only going to be really successful if you see that diversity, which shows that everyone was able to connect with their own interests.
Actually, can I pick up on something I saw on live stream? So Uniteach says, my 18-year-old undergrads are nervous about creativity. Something happens in their senior years of schooling. So actually, related to this idea of having the freedom to pursue whatever you want and to connect to your passions and interests, one sort of interesting finding out of the research we've been doing with teachers is that sometimes there's pushback from the students themselves, where kids, just in the culture of schooling, have so long been separated from what they're interested in that when this moment comes to, be creative, to follow your passions, they shy away from it a bit. That, oh, no, what do you want me to do? And that even, has happened to me here, where it's like, okay, no, what's the right thing to do? What do you want me to do? And to turn around and say, no, what do you care about? What is it that you want to pursue? There's that is the last thing I sort of expected in these conversations with educators. I thought kids would be really excited in formal learning environments to sort of dive into it, but in some settings it was so different from what they were experiencing. So I'm kind of not surprised to see that comment from Uniteach.
And maybe even more as kids get older. I think one thing we see in school a lot of times, in early elementary school, kids are much more willing to dive in and just explore and be curious and not worry about things going wrong, or they're more willing to take risks. But then over time, they're more hesitant about doing that. So that is a big part of what we have to, and with the educators themselves as well, the same thing. So it's something we definitely have to think about a lot as we introduce Scratch.
And there's also a developmental conversation happening. It's pointed out by Stephen and millennial, that, you know, like, okay, maybe 15, 16, 17, 18, it's like not cool to be creative. Wait until they're in their 20s, and then someone else talking about kindergartners. Oh no, they love that. So there's, yeah, lots of hoop jumping in upper secondary school. So yeah, settings matter, age matters, like all of these context, shocker, context matters.
And different cultures. You'll see this somewhat
yeah.
differently in different countries, different cultures.
Yeah. Should we talk a little bit about sharing? I had more projects, but...
What do you think? Up to you.
I know there's some great examples of sharing, so
okay.
But I defer to you.
So do you want to just jump ahead to sharing, you think?
Yeah, do you want to
okay, fine.
Okay, I need a second, so I will let you set it up while I jump.
Yeah, well, maybe I'll just start, but, you know, I think in the things we're doing, we've always thought about creating and sharing going hand in hand. That part of the reason for creating is to be able to share with others. And we see sharing in the Scratch online community serving multiple purposes. Is partly that you get an audience for your creation. So partly there's a pride in showing others what you have done. It's also an opportunity to get feedback and suggestions from other people. On the other side, in addition to sharing your own things, you can take advantage of what others have shared to get inspired.
Yeah, sorry, go ahead. I was going to say, we were able to learn a lot from others' code on the Scratch website, especially when we had a particular problem with our coding. For example, we wanted our sprites to bounce off the walls.
Yeah, so well, both. So by looking at other projects, you get inspired, to get a sense of what's possible. You also can learn how things work and how things. I remember at the last Scratch conference, there were some elementary school kids who one of them wanted to make a sprite bounce or something. You just typed in bounce into the website and then found projects where sprites were bouncing and saw the code. So being able to find out how other people have done the things you want to do. So we see lots of ways that people benefit from the sharing. Probably the most, there are lots of different types of sharing that go on. So people share their projects, but they do it in many different ways. One way they share ideas is just by commenting on each other's projects.
And there's just a huge number of comments. So actually, earlier in the session, we mentioned that there are more than 3 million projects in the online community, but that number is almost completely dwarfed by the number of comments that kids are leaving for each other. And those comments are being put into the service of a variety of connections and between people. So for example...
You're going to lead over to this, or okay?
Oh, no.
I didn't know. Wasn't quite sure of that segue. So here's one. This is an example. This is one where people are. Another way that people are sharing is sort of by remixing and sort of learning from each other's projects. It's like this was one project. I'm just going to have it run again. See if I can get it to go again. So this is a project that someone shared on the website. It was actually looking at the physics of how a string moves and how waves move along a string. So they were writing the different types of relationships between the different parts of the string to simulate the way a string works. So this was more of a science type project. But someone saw this on the website and they felt that it also didn't, in addition to being a science simulation, it could be a more expressive project as well. Artistic project. So they took the underlying code and remixed it. So you can take people's code and then make changes to it. In this case, it's changing the object, so it became a string of pearls was the way that they were saying it. And yet another Scratcher saw this and said, well, maybe he could do something else with that. And he took his name, which happened to be Nate, and then he put his name on the string, so it would go around. So there you see a picture of Nate. So people are building on each other's work in all sorts of different ways. So this type of remixing happens all the time. Of the 3 million projects on the Scratch website, about 1 million of them are remixes, meaning that someone was building on someone else's project. Now sometimes this gets into some disputes on the website because somebody will make a project and then someone else will remix it, and the original author will say, they stole my ideas, they stole my project. And we spend a lot of time talking in the community about how, no, in the Scratch community, we encourage people to build on each other's work. Of course, you should give credit and acknowledgement. That being a good community member, you need to give credit when you build on top of someone else's work, but the whole community can benefit. So there's been a lot of discussion about the ideas of sharing through remixing, And it's really helped ideas spread through the community and led to all types of innovative projects I think would never have been possible if people weren't building on each other's work. Yeah. This is project one of a former student in our group, Andres Monroe Hernandez, did his whole doctoral dissertation just on this idea of remixing in Scratch, both what people learned through remixing, how their attitudes shifted through remixing. And I think that's also an important part of just being a citizen of the online world these days. It's not just about Scratch. This happens in many different settings. But I think Scratch is a good world to start exploring and experimenting with the idea of remixing and ownership.
So remixing is an example of like often more diffuse collaborations and interactions between young learners and young
Because a lot of times the remixer, the two people don't even know each other. That they do it at separate times, and one's just building on each other's work.
I've certainly made use of that myself. Yeah. But I think what was super surprising and really inspiring about the Scratch Online community is the way that kids got together to form more intentional partnerships. And I mean, the website does not support collaborations, particular structures very effectively.
Right. And so it shows how much people want to do it, because we didn't support it very well, and they did it anyway.
Yeah. So one of our favorite examples, I think this is very early days of the Scratch Online community, an 8-year-old, an 11-year-old, and a 13-year-old found each other in the Scratch Online community, and they happened to share a passion for Halloween. They were really excited about Halloween as a topic, and they were really excited about working with each other. And in interviewing them, they talked about how they had this awareness that none of them could have done it on their own, that they necessarily needed, they needed each other. One was an amazing artist, one was an amazing programmer, one was an amazing administrator. So they all came together in this really productive and interesting way, and they recruited a whole slew of other kids working over a 3-month period to develop this project. So this has been in the community. Some of you may already seen this, because I love this example so much, but these kids collaborated on a large-scale project that really I think would have been very difficult to do on your own. So that's something I think we've loved. So from remix to commenting to all these different types of interactions.
To collabs. In fact, I think I'd never heard the term before. The kids refer to these as collabs, groups that are collaborating together. So we're now trying to see how we can do more to support them, because clearly there's a real interest in doing these types of collaborations. So maybe the fourth element is reflecting. Mm-hmm. And I thought we were thinking maybe we would talk about reflecting on how and what people learn through all these experiences. So as they step back and reflect on the creating and the sharing they do, what are the different types of, what is it that people are learning as they create with Scratch? And I know as we've talked over the last few years, Karen and I have done a lot of thinking around the type of learning that goes on with, as people are creating and sharing with Scratch. As part of an NSF grant we did under the framework of computational thinking, we started dividing down some of the different types of things that kids were learning. And I think when people think about coding, they know that kids are going to be learning some specific computational ideas about sequence and parallelism and events and conditionals. And clearly they do that during Scratch, when they're creating with Scratch. But I think for us, that wasn't enough, because we didn't see it as something that was only for learning these computational or mathematical ideas. I think we really were hoping to go beyond that. So we started thinking about what are the different, how kids go beyond that as they're learning to code with Scratch. Mm-hmm. So you want to talk about computational practices?
Yes. So computational practices definitely inspired by the type of practices we see in the design world. So again, spending a lot of time with kids, studying what they're doing, being at the MIT Media Lab, interacting with a lot of people who are engineers, programmers. These are key designers, artists engaged in these key practices. So, you want to be iterative and incremental, you want to test and debug, you want to reuse and remix, as we've already talked about, and abstracting and modularizing. How do you take something from a vision in your head to something concrete, in this case, concrete as expressed in a Scratch project, but also just breaking down problems. That's an incredibly valuable skill to have. So you don't feel totally overwhelmed by a challenge, you just break it down.
Yeah, I think one reason we're excited to see kids develop these capacities is because these strategies are useful in all different types of design activities. So it's not specific to Scratch or even to coding, but it's useful for all types of design activities that people do. So it's great to see. I think Scratch is a type of test bed where they can start developing those capacities. And then the third layer was computational perspectives. And there we thought it's not even just learning concepts and new strategies and practices, but it's always new ways of seeing yourself and seeing the world around you. Yeah, I'll start with the first one, expressing. This is one that was always important to me. It's not just about learning to design, but starting to see yourself as a designer. It's great when we see kids starting to see themselves in a new way, that I'm someone who can design things, I can create things, I can express myself. I don't just have to be a reader, I can be a writer. I can create things with the computer. I don't have to just point and click and interact. I can express myself with the technology.
And connecting, I mean, we've already talked about this a lot. We've seen it in the live stream as well. The power of connecting with other people and just having the sense of the power of networks.
Yeah. And then questioning, of having a type of seeing the world through a questioning eye as you start to look at things in the world, starting to think about what are the computational, mechanisms underlying it. When you see things work in the world, how can you take a computational lens for understanding the world around you and raising questions about different things in the computational world. And
yeah, trying to pick up a thread that I'm seeing on the live stream feed is also thinking about crossing the boundaries between the digital and the physical, and all of the interesting ways. There are all sorts of interesting extensions that hook into Scratch. So the Scratch board, Makey, a couple of people have mentioned that. That's something we're really excited about. So how do you think about the world around you entirely different by hacking it? That's a phrase that Jay uses a lot, and I just love that it isn't just something you experience, but it's something you remake. Yeah. And it's very powerful, and we see that with kids, whether it's with Scratch or Scratchboard. There's like a laundry list of like cool things to play with. So I hope that's being compiled in the Google Doc, because it's awesome. And obviously Kylie's done a lot of work with the physical world stuff as well. So
I see, look at the clock, we've been taking longer than I thought we were going to take, and we want to make sure we leave some time for questions. We did want to end with a suggestion for an activity for the upcoming week. So maybe we'll say a few things about that and then try to get more to. We've been doing some responding to the questions, but it would be great to have a little more time.
And the Scratch site might be down.
Oh.
I've been seeing things in the live stream like we can't access Scratch, and so we'll see what happens. Do you want to set that up, and I'll explore what's going on?
Okay, well, we'll do. So I'll say a little about what we're going to suggest people to do, and unfortunately, maybe the Scratch site is down, so we might not be able to give you the demonstration for next week. What we're going to, Karen is just booting up the previous version of Scratch, so we can show the basic ideas. But I think what we were going to suggest as an activity was for people to dive in to do their first Scratch project, or if you've done Scratch before, do a new Scratch project. We thought it'd be nice if people did a Scratch project about themselves, to share something about themselves, and maybe we could then share it online so people within the community that's following this month can start to get to know each other a little bit better. So we're going to try to encourage you to do some projects where you're showing something about yourself. So there are a few different places that we can give pointers to that we'll send out some links to do these projects that we sometimes call About Me, that are projects that we can, where people can start saying things about their hobbies, their interests, about their backgrounds. And typically when we do that in Scratch, so it really is down, huh? It really doesn't go down very often. Not very good timing. So maybe we'll just show, should we show a little bit with, you want to show a little bit just with the previous version, just to show something on getting started with an About Me project, or should we go to answering questions?
Maybe questions. We can
Fine.
Send links to.
Fine, we'll send links with you. Okay. So you've been doing a better job than I've been doing at multitasking, seeing the questions. I see you've been picking them up.
Well, I've been cheating. Kylie's been been filtering them. There's this idea of different settings in which to try Scratch. So there's been a lot of love for librarians in the live stream, which has been exciting. We've got some very good friends who are museum educators who have been doing exciting things in that space. But there is the question of what to do at school. Yeah. So we've been working with a lot of educators, and for some people, and I know this would certainly be the case for me, is that I'd want to try it out in sort of maybe a lower stake setting. So maybe doing an after school club or doing a lunch club. And so it just gives me a chance to get my feet wet, explore the terrain, and then maybe move it into more formal settings. Instructional technology specialists have played an incredibly important role in helping think about Scratch in schools, where they try it out, they provide some support, provide some guidance about scope and sequence. Much earlier in the live stream, there's a question about scope and sequence. And so actually, if you look at the Scratch Ed online community, that's a place where more than 8,000 educators have joined since its launch in 2009. They're sharing curriculum plans, they're sharing activities, just the highs and lows of helping people learn Scratch. So there's a lot of interesting content there.
And one thing that's always striking to me about the Scratch Ed community of educators is, again, how diverse, even those who are in formal schools come from all different disciplinary backgrounds, different age backgrounds, different grade levels.
So there isn't just one place for it. I think it's a bit of a misconception.
Which
that
can
it
be a
has
challenge
to be
too.
science.
We think it's one of the great things about Scratch in our mind is that it can be adopted in so many different ways and can be used by young kids doing book reports in 3rd grade versus computer science problems in high school. But it's also a challenge because since it's used in different ways, sometimes people get lost in all of the different possibilities.
Yeah, it can be pretty overwhelming. So I think, again, that's where the power of community has played such an important role, not just for the kids, but for adults. And speaking of communities of adults, there was a question about parents. So how do parents fit into all of this? So I'm really excited because not next week, but the following week, we're going to have adults who support young Scratch learners. And so teacher, librarian, parent, it's going to be really fun. But what is the pathway? So I think over the past several years, we've seen different ways in which parents get involved. So you have some parents who are the super geeks. They love it. They want to geek out with the technology. They know how to program. They want their child to learn how to program, and that's one way in. As Mitch said, kids often bring it to the adults. So some kids will be like, I love playing video games. I want to learn how to make my own game. I found this tool. Will you help me learn it? And parents often play a special role in helping with that actually modularization, breaking down a problem where kids, they have the creative vision, but they're not exactly, well, how do you even start to break down a problem? So parents come in all sorts of ways and exit in all sorts of ways.
We've seen actually, at some of the after-school centers that we've worked at, when the parents come in, the kids can take great pride that they're teaching their parents something. At certain times where it's it opens up new possibilities in the ways that they relate to one another.
Yeah, someone mentioned Coder Dojo, which is such an inspiring model for learning that it really is that participatory co-learning, which we always try and support in what we do as well. So it's, really inspiring.
See other ones that you jump out at you?
I don't know. Maybe we transition.
There's a question, is there a plan for a kind of 3D Scratch? Actually, we're not planning a 3D Scratch, partly because we really like when kids create their own images and they grab images from online. And with 2D, it's a lot easier to be a maker. It's not as easy to be a maker with 3D. So at least for now, we're not doing as much.
But I think there's an underlying point that even though this is Scratch Month, there are Scratch maps onto bigger, powerful ideas than just Scratch. So Scratch may just be one point on a way, on a trajectory of experiences. So it's not like we expect everyone to be using Scratch for all time, or that's the only thing that they ever use. It just becomes part of your repertoire.
Yeah. And in fact, I think that's one thing we want to look at even more in the future is the pathways into Scratch and out of Scratch, that it sort of connects that Scratch is not an island. We see lots of projects on the Scratch website of kids who are interested in other things, then use Scratch as a way to explore their interests. Like kids who love Minecraft, they do Minecraft, animations in Scratch. So kids are always sharing within the Scratch community other things they're interested in and moving back and forth.
So we're really excited about this whole month, and we're looking forward to learning with you, alongside you. But with that, we'll turn it back to Kylie. Does that work?
Sure does. Well, thank you, Karen, and thank you, Mitch. It's been really exciting to kind of hear about all of the Scratch 2.0 features and what's been happening in the Scratch community and some of the sample work that the kids are creating. It's just really wild to see some of the projects and the different directions that the kids have been taking the work. So I want to end with a few notes for the audience, and I want to thank you for joining us this evening. By sometime tomorrow, we'll have a full recording of this webinar and other curated content on www.connectedlearning.tv that you can share with your networks. This wraps up our kickoff event, but that doesn't mean that we have to pause our conversations. We encourage everyone to keep this energy going by using the Twitter hashtag #LearnToCode, all one word, and by posting in the Connected Learning Google Plus community. There's been a lot of chatter tonight on the live stream, and so I thank all of you for offering questions and for answering questions. You know, there's a lot of people that have been using Scratch in their context and building up some really interesting pieces, sharing their information there. And I'd like to invite you to join us again next Monday on June 10th from 4 to 5 p.m. Pacific time. We'll meet up again on live stream to talk about some of the diverse ways young people are creating with Scratch. So in the meantime, check out www.connectedlearning.tv for more information on how to get involved. And thanks again, everyone.